The Dicastery for Catholic Education has just published a document on the characteristics that Catholic schools should have, as well as those who work in them and those who in some way attend as students or the parents of those students. It is a good document. Of course, nothing is perfect, and perhaps it could have been a little more ambitious in some issues to have gone into some important topics. It is also true that it is influenced, as it could not be otherwise, by the fashions of the moment, but it is a good document. In this document, the first thing is that it puts Catholic education in relation to what is essential to it. Catholic education is part of the evangelizing mission of the Church, and every Catholic school or university should be seen in this perspective. The evangelizing mission of the Church in a Catholic school, the first thing has to be to evangelize. And from there, you have to see everything else. Logically, not only should they evangelize in religion class, of course, you have to teach mathematics or language, but the overall perspective has to be that of evangelization. And this, says the document, must be known. Also, the parents of the students and even the students themselves. There is a Catholic ideology in the school, and the parents who take their children to that school and the students who attend, who are old enough to make decisions, should know where they are going. You cannot take a child to a school just because there he will be treated with more discipline and he will be taught to study better. You take a child to a Catholic school because it is a Catholic school. There are more and more clashes between parents of students and sometimes between students and Catholic schools, because when the latter want to apply the Catholic ideology of the school, which parents know before taking them to that school, parents protest and even denounce. Although these clashes between parents and schools are unfortunately more and more frequent, however, the reasons for greater friction have occurred in recent years with teachers, with some teachers, especially with some teachers who teach the subject of religion, especially because their behavior, for example, being living as a couple without marrying in the church, sometimes because they cannot, because they are homosexual couples, and others because even being heterosexual couples, they do not get married. Well, then, these cases that have occurred, I repeat, so far, they have only noticed religion teachers. These cases have generated a lot of trouble when the head of the school or the bishop has withdrawn permission for these people to give the subject of religion. The document insists that the educator has to be an educator also with his behavior, that you cannot teach one thing and with your behavior be saying the opposite of what you teach, if you teach the right thing. But on top of that, the document of the Dicastery for Catholic Education also adds that this necessary coherence should not only be demanded to the religion teacher, but to all the teachers, to all the educators of that center. This is especially important because it gives the schools a moral backing to be able to demand from these teachers that which is linked to Catholic education. And the Vatican document goes a step further. It says that the bishops have the right and the duty to supervise that these teachers who work in Catholic schools lead a coherent life, at least in what is manifestly coherent with their faith. One of the best known cases in recent years was the confrontation between the Archbishop of Indianapolis in the United States with a Jesuit school located in his diocese, Brebeuf School. Well, in that school, one of the professors had contracted a civil marriage. It was a relatively public issue. It was not a private issue. He had contracted a civil marriage with another man. That other man, curiously, also worked in a Catholic school, in a different school. The Archbishop asked the Jesuit school not to renew this teacher's contract. He also asked the other school, and they accepted. Well, the Jesuit school refused, and then the Archbishop withdrew the denomination of Catholic. He said, "You go ahead, but you are no longer a Catholic school. You can no longer say that you are a Catholic school." And he also prevented the two priests who worked in that school from celebrating Mass. He prevented them from celebrating Mass. In some circumstances, they could continue to celebrate daily Mass, early Mass, but in circumstances of a more public and collective character for the school, he prohibited them from celebrating Mass. The Jesuits appealed to the Congregation for Catholic Education. That was in 2019. Still, there is no sentence. I imagine, well, the congregation immediately, as there had been an appeal, suspended the bishop's decree, which was therefore without effect. Well, there is still no response. There is still no conclusion to that trial on appeal. It is possible that now, after this document, there will be a response. At least I do not know that there has been such a response, and I have been looking on the internet to see if it already existed. Since 2019, it has been more than 2 years. From now on, it is clear that the bishop has the right and the duty to intervene when the school does not do what it should do. Require their teachers to be consistent with their public life, not entering into their privacy, but with their public life, with what the school is going to teach with its Catholic ideology. Well, I think that with this document, some things will be clarified. I regret that the document had not gone further, that it had not gone a little more in depth, because although the cases, like the one I just cited, of professors of religion or not, who lead a life publicly different or incoherent with the teachings of the Church, although these cases exist, and are very striking when they appear in the newsletters, fortunately, they are very infrequent. On the other hand, unfortunately, it is much more frequent that the religious teachings taught in these schools are not the teachings of the Church. And this is not usually the responsibility of the laity, but is usually the responsibility of the owners of the schools, priests or religious. It should have been requested that not only the teachers should lead a life consistent with the faith, but also that the teaching given should be consistent with the doctrine of the Church. I remember the letter that the Pope, already Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI, wrote to the presidents of all the episcopal conferences of the world on the occasion of the meeting they had in Rome to deal with the issue of pederasty. In that very important, profound, lucid letter, Benedict XVI told them that as bishops, they had the duty not only to supervise and prevent the sexual abuse of minors, but he also told them that there is another type of abuse, perhaps not comparable to physical abuse, but there is another type of abuse which is spiritual abuse. When those minors, and Pope Benedict also spoke of what was happening in homilies when adults went to Mass but didn't have sufficient formation, when those minors were receiving as if it were church doctrine, something that was not. And he asked the bishops, as defenders of the faith, to take care of this and to prevent this abuse. Perhaps the document of the Congregation of Catholic Education about schools should also have emphasized this, that the religious teaching given in Catholic schools should always be faithful to the teaching of the Church, and could even have gone a little further and demanded that this coherence should also take place in the catechesis of the parishes, many of which are magnificent, but others, of course, not so much. And here are two questions. Why the evangelization failure of so many Catholic schools? It is a known fact that most of the students of those schools, after a certain age, no longer go to Mass. Just ask them, and we all know it, at least in the West. Why this failure? Is it not because they are not teaching the Catholic doctrine, but a substitute that is supposed to be more easily accepted by the students because it is not so demanding, but which in reality the students rejected? We should ask ourselves if this evangelizing failure is not a failure in other subjects, because education can be very good. But if this evangelizing failure is not related precisely to the lack of fidelity to the teaching of Christ, what is being rejected? The substitute or the original? Isn't the substitute being rejected precisely because the original is not shown, even though the original is apparently more demanding, but in the end is much more convincing? See you next week, God willing.